Imagine spending 20 years building a reputation on one single promise. The truth. Always the truth. No matter who sits across from you. No matter how powerful they are. No matter what it costs. That is Savannah Guthrie. And now, for the first time in her career, the spotlight isn't pointed at someone else. It's pointed at her home. Here is what we know. A federal investigation exists. It slowed down in ways investigators themselves did not expect. And at the center of that slowdown is a name most Americans have never heard, but one that is deeply, permanently, uncomfortably connected to one of the most trusted faces in American journalism. Her husband. Stay with me. Because in the next 60 seconds I am going to show you something that federal investigators themselves have refused to explain on record. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. To understand what is happening right now, you have to understand who Savannah Guthrie actually is, not the version you see on television, but the version that existed long before the cameras found her. She was raised in Tucson, Arizona. Not in privilege. Not in political circles. In a household built on hard work and quiet discipline. From the beginning, she was someone who demanded more from herself than the situation required. She studied journalism and then went further. She earned a law degree. She passed the bar. In a profession full of talented communicators, she added something rare, the ability to think like a lawyer while speaking like a journalist. Precision wrapped inside warmth. By the time she joined NBC's Today Show, she wasn't simply filling a chair. She was reshaping what that chair could be. One moment she could laugh through a cooking segment. The next she could face a sitting president and hold that line until he answered, or until the entire country watched him refuse to. That balance is not performance. It is years of knowing exactly what the truth costs and choosing to pursue it anyway. Then in 2014, she married Michael Feldman. And this is where the story becomes complicated. Michael Feldman is not a household name. He was never meant to be. His world operates in the spaces between headlines, the briefing rooms, the strategy sessions, the quiet phone calls that happen before anything becomes public. He co-founded the Glover Park Group, a Washington communications and lobbying firm that grew into one of the most connected operations in the city. His clients were not small. Tech corporations. Pharmaceutical companies. Foreign governments navigating the complexity of American politics. His influence was real, sustained, and deliberately kept out of view. From the outside, their life looked like a modern American success story. A journalist at the height of her career. A strategist embedded at the center of power. 2 children. Stability. The full picture. Until it wasn't. Something changed. It didn't announce itself. It never does in Washington. A story began to surface, not in headlines, not in press releases, but in the quiet back-channel conversations where the city's most serious problems are first identified. The kind of story that doesn't need volume to travel. It moves on its own, through the right rooms, carried by the right people. And it placed Michael Feldman in territory no one expected. To understand why, you need to understand one law. Most people have never heard of it. It is called the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA. On paper it is simple. If you represent foreign governments or political interests in the United States, you must register. You must disclose. The public has a right to know who is being influenced and by whom. But Washington's lobbying world has spent decades learning how to operate at the edges of that requirement. How to serve foreign clients without technically crossing the line. How to structure relationships so that the obligation to register becomes open to interpretation. The Glover Park Group operated in that environment. High stakes. High pressure. Powerful clients. And very little room for legal error. So when questions began to emerge, not loudly, not through official channels, but persistently, they didn't focus on a single action. They focused on patterns. On timing. On whether certain relationships with foreign entities had been disclosed fully, or only disclosed enough. And that is when Michael Feldman's name entered a conversation it had never been part of before. Not as an accusation. Not in a courtroom. But in the background, steady, quiet, and impossible to ignore. What makes this story unusual is how the investigation actually began. It had nothing to do with Feldman. Not at first. Federal investigators launched a broad examination of lobbying activities connected to foreign entities during a politically sensitive period. The scope was wide. Multiple firms. Multiple individuals. Multiple financial trails being mapped at the same time. It followed the expected pattern. Documents collected. Interviews conducted. Connections mapped with precision. Steady, methodical progress, exactly what a serious federal inquiry is supposed to look like. And then, without explanation, the momentum stopped. Not collapsed. Not formally closed. Stopped. Leads that should have triggered immediate follow-up went quiet. People who had spoken to investigators waited for a second call that never came. What had been building carefully for months didn't conclude. It simply faded. That kind of shift does not go unnoticed in Washington. When an investigation loses momentum and no one explains why, the city notices. Questions form almost automatically. There is a clean version of this story. A convenient one. The version where everything slowed because there was nothing there. Where the threads led only to activity that was technically legal, properly disclosed, unremarkable. Where Michael Feldman is exactly what he appears to be, a skilled strategist briefly caught in a wide-angle investigation that found no real wrongdoing. That version may be true. But what makes this story linger is not what was confirmed. It is what was never explained. The investigators who would know the full picture are not offering answers. Not on the record. Not in detail. One former federal official, speaking anonymously, described a reality that rarely makes it into public discussion. There are moments, they said, when the cost of continuing an investigation becomes part of the calculation. Not in theory. In practice. Resources are finite. Priorities are set. And sometimes those priorities are shaped by factors that have very little to do with the evidence itself. That comment hangs in the air. Unconfirmed. Unrefuted. Unresolved. Michael Feldman is not an isolated figure. His professional network crosses political lines, industries, and administrations. He knows the people who make calls before calls become official. He has operated inside the system long enough to understand how it breathes when it moves forward, and when it quietly decides not to. That is not an accusation. It is simply the documented reality of a 20-year career at the intersection of politics and influence. And standing directly beside that world is Savannah Guthrie, who has said almost nothing publicly about any of this. Her silence is not an accident. She is a trained lawyer and a veteran journalist. She understands, perhaps better than almost anyone, exactly how words carry weight and exactly how silence can carry even more. But here is where the tension builds. The Glover Park Group's work happens behind closed doors. Attorney-client privilege. Strategic confidentiality. These are standard and legitimate in high-level communications work. But in a regulatory environment that demands transparency around foreign representation, discretion and disclosure can come into direct conflict. The question at the heart of this investigation was never about something obviously illegal. It was more nuanced than that. It was about boundaries. Whether the line between private strategy and public accountability had been crossed. Whether what was documented on paper truly reflected what was happening in practice. Those are not questions with fast answers. And timing matters. Investigations like this one do not exist in isolation. They move inside a broader political environment that can shift without warning. When that environment shifts, when priorities change, when resources get redirected, even serious inquiries can lose their forward motion. What is harder to acknowledge is this: in Washington, being investigated is its own consequence. Long before any conclusion is reached, the damage begins. Clients create distance. Partnerships dissolve. Legal costs escalate across years. Reputations change not because of proven facts, but because of proximity to scrutiny itself. The investigation does not need a verdict to reshape everything it touches. Those who know Savannah Guthrie describe someone grounded, composed, and genuinely resilient. This is not someone who breaks easily. She has already faced challenges that would quietly end most careers. A serious health scare that threatened her vision. The relentless intensity of live national television across nearly 2 decades. The constant weight of public expectation, every single morning, without exception. Through all of it, she has not cracked. Not for cameras. Not for sympathy. Because steadiness is not something she performs, it is something she is. And right now, that same steadiness may be the thing she is relying on most. The position she occupies is one very few people could navigate without stumbling. She must be a supportive partner in private while remaining, in public, a journalist whose entire career rests on an uncompromising pursuit of truth. Those two things do not easily coexist. Most people would have to choose. She has not stepped away. She has not disappeared. She continues to show up, every morning, to ask the questions, which only adds another layer to what is already a complex story. Day after day, she appears exactly where audiences expect her. Composed. Focused. Unwavering. But consistency is not the same as clarity. And whatever is being carried in the private space she shares with Michael Feldman, it has not visibly altered the role she plays in public. She holds her position with the same precision that built her reputation, because that precision is, ultimately, all she has direct control over. Right now, this story does not have an ending. The investigation remains unresolved. The questions remain open. The man at the center of it, the man she chose to build a life with, is still tied to a world where answers do not arrive quickly, and sometimes do not arrive at all. What we know is undeniable. The investigation exists. The slowdown happened. The uncertainty is real. These are not rumors. They are not speculation. They are the documented reality of a situation that has not yet resolved itself. And at the center of it are real people navigating something genuinely complicated under the full weight of public attention. This story forces a closer look. Not just at two individuals, but at the system itself. At how power actually operates, not in official statements or press releases, but in the quiet spaces where decisions are made before anyone announces them. At how accountability is pursued, and sometimes paused. And at what it really costs to live a life where public trust and private reality exist in the same house. Savannah Guthrie has built her career on one belief, that questions deserve answers. That accountability is not optional. That the public has a right to know. The question no one is asking out loud, the one that sits beneath everything, is whether those same principles, the one she has lived so publicly for so long, will one day have to be applied closer to home. We do not know the answer yet. Neither does she. And that uncertainty, real, unresolved, human, is exactly what makes this story impossible to look away from. If this made you think, not just react, share it with someone who asks the harder questions. And tell us in the comments, what does the silence mean to you?